I thought that too. Yes, we see the problem. Let's have these wise elites in government fix it. And then I watched them work. And I'm embarrassed at how long it took me to see that the plans of the anointed go awry. They make things worse.
TV journalist John Stossel. Today on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson. John Stossel never set out to be a broadcast journalist. In fact, he kind of stumbled into it. After college, a friend of his got him an entry-level job, a very low-level entry-level job at a TV station in Portland, Oregon. Now, he was there for a few years. He built his reputation there after the boss put him on the air despite a stage fright and a childhood stutter. Stossel made his mark, and from there he moved on to a job in New York City at WCBS-TV, where he furthered his journalistic reputation, eventually joining ABC News, where he co-hosted 2020 for several years, and then ultimately was on to Fox News. Now, along the way, John Stossel picked up 19 Emmy Awards. Not bad for the kid who hadn't known he was going to be a broadcast journalist. This iconic TV personality with the libertarian bent had a catchphrase, and that catchphrase was, "Give me a break." You may remember his TV specials by that name. So it was no particular coincidence that that's also what he called his first book, published in 2004. I talked with him about that book shortly after it came out. In just a moment, our conversation.
They say what's old is new again. You're about to see if that's true as you listen to an interview from noted radio personality Bill Thompson's 30-year archive. Enjoy.
So here now, from 2004, John Stossel.
You have said so much in this book that needed to have been said, and the cases needed to have been made. Not that you haven't been on the air, but when you put it in a book where you can actually sit down and over a period of a couple of hours absorb everything that you're talking about, you make some excellent points.
Thank you very much.
And this is...
I agree.
I wouldn't expect you not to. Are you preaching to the choir, though, with a book like this? Are the people who are likely to read this the people who already agree with you?
Probably, but I hope that there are people who, as I did before I found my way in the world of politics, who felt that, gee, this liberalism we grew up with isn't really making much sense. These government programs go awry. But the conservatives, they seem sort of mean-spirited and they want to run my sex life. Is there any other way out there? And I hope those people will find Give Me a Break.
Well, government regulation sounds like you have noble ideals. You want to make a level playing field. You want to make sure everybody has the proper chance to succeed and to prosper in this world. What goes wrong? Why don't regulations work the way they were intended to?
Your question sums it up perfectly. I thought that too. Yes, we see the problem. Let's have these wise elites in government fix it. And then I watched them work. And I'm embarrassed at how long it took me to see that the plans of the anointed go awry. They make things worse. Look at the lives of the American Indians. No one is more managed by government. No one does worse. In the area of the market, I watched them, the regulators, they were going to protect consumers and clamp down on business. But what they did was clamp down on the good businesses, on the hair braider who wanted to open a shop, the American dream, and instead he's supposed to go to cosmetology school and spend 1,000 hours learning shampooing. And the real crooks were not affected by all the regulation. The people selling the breast enlargers and the burn fat while you sleep pills, they keep getting away with it. So the regulators just build empires. The lawyers get themselves rich and feed off this system, but consumers don't benefit. The market does it better.
How can it benefit consumers when you, as the example that you use, New York City's experiment with public toilets? We need good, clean public toilets. Europeans have them. Why can't New York City have them?
They tried to have them. They brought them in, 3 experimental toilets from a French company, and I loved them, and the people I interviewed coming out of them loved them. You put in a quarter, they self-clean, water shot through the floor and the sink. But they had to get permission from all the agencies that had to approve. 13 agencies in New York City. The Department of Transportation alone has a 100-page contract. First they said, no, these toilets discriminate against women because they had urinals. as well as toilets. So they got rid of those and said, okay, only all-stall toilets. Then the Americans with Disabilities Act, they had to make them bigger. That meant drug dealers were using them to do business, prostitutes were using them to do business. They said, okay, this experiment was a great success, but we have to rip them out now. We'll bring them back. It's been 10 years. They're still trying to work it out, and people have to hold it.
Well, the same people who have to hold it are the same people standing on the corner waiting for a bus because the private van system they used to use was put out of business by the bus operators.
Well, because the regulation never, ever really works, the private vans are still going, but the politicians continue to try to put them out of business. And
How can you put them out of business? They're private individuals. They're doing a service.
They're not. These were vans. Immigrants would drive down the bus routes and say, look, for $1, but at the time the fare on the bus was $1.50. We'll pick you up. We'll be quicker. We'll take you closer to where you want to go. Everybody loved it, but the bus drivers union said, you can't compete with us. Our service is good enough. But of course, the market had spoken. If their service were good enough, there wouldn't have been this demand for these van services. So the city council moves to put them out of business.
But if you go back to the regulation is in place to prevent people from just ramshackle, falling apart buses that are unsafe, that have carbon monoxide coming in. Maybe they don't bother to get insurance. It's the bad guys the regulation was meant to keep off the streets, right?
Always true. And in the case of the vans, that was true then, too. How do we know it's safe? How do we know that this guy isn't going to kill somebody? And we don't know. But the perfect is the enemy of the good. And the buses, it turns out, have just as bad a safety record. People aren't being hurt in vans. We already have some licensing. You have to have a driver's license to get the car, and the cars are subject to occasional safety inspections. How much regulation do you need? If you let the bureaucrats decide, there will be no end to it ever until they take all our time and all our money.
May I take that phrase, perfect is the enemy of the good, and frame it and put it on my wall? That sums up so much of what I have perceived as going wrong, is we are on a quest for perfection. Our lives must be perfect, and if they're not, somebody's to blame, and I'm going to sue them.
That's right, and utopia isn't one of the options, but the regulators always can say, we can make it better. OSHA's a good example, Occupational Safety and Health Act. They said, we can make, look, people are being hurt at the workplace, and they pass all these rules, and then they can hold up a chart and show, look, workplace injuries are down. But what they never did is look at the decline in workplace injuries before OSHA was created, and it was going down at the same rate, because as we get richer, as we get smarter, as technology improves, people learn how to protect themselves, and free people are better at it than bureaucrats in Washington, D.C.
Now, 100 years ago, labor unions were formed to protect workers against horrible bosses who with horrible working conditions. Reading your story about here, your early experiences at WCBS reminded me when I worked at WBZ in Boston a number of years ago, where there was actually a reporter who got up at 4:30 during the middle of a trial that he was covering and walked out and went back to the station and clocked out and went home because the union said his shift was over. Regardless, the trial was still going on. His shift was over. What sense does this make?
It makes no sense, and I broke these rules all the time, and fortunately they were not enforced on me. The worst were the technical unions, where to have a pizza as a prop on the set on Columbus Day, where you're paying everybody time and a half, meant you had to pay the stagehand who hands it to the prop man, and it would cost $400.
I'd be tempted to say, give me a break in those cases, too.
This is what drives unionized businesses out of business.
After this short break, John Stossel addresses the question of courage.
If you've ever wondered where to find the captivating books we discuss on Now I've Heard Everything, wonder no more.
Just tap the link in our show notes or visit our website, heardeverything.com.
Plus, when you purchase through our affiliate links, you're not only diving into great stories, but also supporting this podcast.
And we thank you for your support.
Now back to my 2004 conversation with John Stossel.
Let me ask you, step back a moment, ask a question about the putting together of the book in the first place. When I first saw your book advertised in a catalog, I guess a HarperCollins catalog some months ago, it was described more as a memoir than it was, or maybe the memoir isn't the right word, but a more personal story of your transformation from liberal to libertarian. Has the book changed from its initial conception to what the finished product is?
Not consciously. The beginning is
Or was that
my
marketing?
memoir of how I got into television and how I gradually learned that everything I thought was true was not.
Because I think your story is a fascinating story.
Which part?
No, I mean the part about you and your evolution in the business. I mean, you make great points in this book, and I love reading every chapter, but I want a little bit more of you in the book.
Well, what did you want to know?
I'm just fascinated by people who are successful in this business, and successful by often bucking the very bosses, the very trends, the very forces that seem to shape many of us. Many of us have just followed the drift, and many of us wish we had the courage to do what you have done.
It didn't seem like courage to me. People say I'm courageous to talk about my stuttering, but I don't think it's courageous. It just makes it easier for me to go on the radio and not stutter when I admit that I'm a stutterer. I don't think it's courageous to challenge my bosses on what I call some liberal bias, because I just have to do it. If I reported on what I saw as a consumer reporter, then I saw abuses by government and lawyers, and I have to report them. It's outrageous what these bullies do. Somebody has to tell it, and if they fire me for it, so be it. ABC has been very good. 2 producers quit when I did my first special, Give Me a Break, and yet ABC said, look, I don't agree with you, said the executive, but this is an interesting intellectual argument that deserves to be made, and they put it on the air. So I just do it, and so far, they haven't fired me.
You have been helped in the long run, you think, by the fact you never went to journalism school?
I think so. It led me to learn by fear. My mother told me, you better work hard or you're going to freeze in the dark, and I've always had this drive to succeed somewhere. And there I was, working in television, not knowing anything and not having preconceptions from journalism school. I just watched people like Jack Perkins and David Brinkley and tried to figure out, what do people need to know about this, and how can I tell it in the way I would enjoy hearing it? And then as the video came, I learned to try to make movies. I think most people write the script and then have an editor cut the film to it. I started by watching the video, and then I write to the video we have, which I think helps me.
But I think one of the transitions or the turning points for you is when you realize that the news is not just what the assignment editor that morning decides the news stories of the day are, that some stories that have much more importance to our daily lives don't happen in a news conference or in a court decision or in a fire or an accident or something. They're longer-term stories, and that somebody has to cover those as well.
I wish more people were covering them. That dawned on me several years into my reporting, that we were rushing out to cover usually what was in the New York Times that morning, who was being elected, what some politician said, and then there was the weather, the murders, and the fires. And I think about it. What really affects your life more? Who is going to be elected, even in the presidential campaign, but who's going to be your senator, what representative gets elected, or stuff that happens slowly? The invention of the computer chip, the invention of the birth control pill, the woman's movement. It's the slow stuff that matters more, but it's harder to cover because you can't just go to Washington and stick a microphone in some politician's face. I gradually realized that, and as a stutterer, I wasn't liking fighting the pack at the news conference, so I was eager to go cover things other people weren't, and I started reporting on science and medicine and psychology.
But it's very unusual for television to, first of all, even cover those things because they're not visual. Like you said, you can't easily put a picture to a story that has broad societal kind of implications. But also, television is so the attention span is so short that it's difficult enough to cover stories like that in Time or Newsweek, but let alone on television.
Though, Bill, I disagree with you there. There are some stories like Social Security and medical insurance that are tough to cover on television because they're not visual. But a lot of these slow stories are visual. The woman's movement, the birth control pill, the computer chip. There are things to show. Science and medicine can be visual.
Before you came in today, I Googled you, which will soon be a trademark term, I'm sure, that I'm not allowed to use, like Kleenex or Xerox. But I Googled you. There are 23,500 and something websites about John Stossel. Does that surprise you?
sites about me?
Well, 23,500 hits. So some of those are probably other pages within the same site. But that's, when I Google myself, I get maybe 3.
Well, I'm on television.
There's even one called what was it? SupportJohnStossel.org.
Save John Stossel. That one I know about. There was a time when
you need to be saved?
Constantly. This particular one started because I made a mistake in a report on organic foods, and it was a relatively trivial mistake. The main point of the story was true, that organic food costs 2 or 3 times as much, and the industry, when it's on TV, admits it's no better, no healthier. Nothing's been proven that it's better. It may contain a little less trace amounts of pesticides, but so what? There's no proof that those hurt anybody. But in that story, I made a mistake saying our tests showed the same amount of pesticides in both organic and non-organic, and we hadn't tested for that. We were testing for bacteria. The producer misunderstood the scientists, but it was 2 sentences in a long report. It was wrong. I apologized for that, but that gave an opening to my enemies to demand I be fired, and someone set up a Save Stossel website.
Mistakes happen.
They do, but it's not okay when I make them because I'm on the politically incorrect side.
I don't gather that politically incorrect is a label that you necessarily are uncomfortable with.
I think it's one of those wonderful words that changed life, that it was hard to fight against the suffocating orthodoxy of the left. But when somebody came up with a term that mocked it, like politically incorrect, that helped.
John Stossel is 78. He now runs Stossel TV. Now, you can get your copy of Give Me a Break by John Stossel by tapping the link in our show notes, by clicking the link in the description below if you're watching this on YouTube, or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. Heardeverything.com is also where you can find my 2004 interview with another iconoclastic journalist, Molly Ivins.
Politics is so dominated by this organized chorus of people on both sides saying the same thing over and over. It's mind-washing, it's propaganda, it's certainly not real political debate.
And my 1989 conversation with one of the broadcast journalists that inspired John Stossel, David Brinkley.
The growth of the government was a result of the withholding tax, which could not have been put in effect without the force and pressure of the war. The government stood here, its mouth open, stunned to see what a Niagara of money was coming in.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can find us wherever you find podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, there was a young American woman who in 2003 went as a peace volunteer in Gaza and lost her life because of it. So next time we will revisit my 2008 conversation with Rachel Corey's parents, Craig and Cindy Corey.
No, I don't think Rachel was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I think she was in the right place at the right time. I certainly wish that bulldozer had stopped. But
we don't think of Rachel as a martyr. I think of Rachel as someone who wanted to live her beliefs and her principles, not just talk about them.
That's next time. Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.